IDERA is funded by the Innovative Health Initiative, and just the usual disclaimers that the views and opinions today are not those of our funders, they are those of ourselves as the authors. Great, so just to start off with this quick overview of IDERA as a project, because I'm aware that not everyone will be familiar of who we are. So IDERA stands for the Integration of Heterogeneous Data and Evidence towards Regulatory and HTA Acceptance. And the project really has sort of two core focuses. First is developing an open platform to enable greater connectivity, access, sharing and use of health data. And we use the term heterogeneous health data, and really that's an umbrella term to cover a wide range of data sources. So the traditional clinical trial data, but much broader data, including electronic health records, imaging data, data from wearables such as smartwatches or smartphone applications, and wider data than that, for example, environmental data looking at things like pollution that might impact our health. So really we're trying to build a platform that allows all that to be integrated and used. And when we're focusing more on the secondary use of data, and I'll touch on that in a second, what we mean by that. And then the second sort of major part of our project, which is the piece we're really looking at, is what are the policy challenges around allowing greater access and sharing and use of heterogeneous health data sources, and how can we work towards developing recommendations to solve those challenges, specifically for this secondary use piece. And when I talk about secondary use of data, just again, so that anyone who's joined today who isn't so familiar, you have these different data sources that come in, and within, when we talk about primary data use, we're talking really about how this data is used for our own health decisions. So how a diagnosis is made for a health condition, or how we're monitored. But really, when we talk about secondary data use, we're talking about how these data sets are then pulled together and can be used for purposes such as research, perhaps into a new treatment. But specifically within the IDERA project, we're focusing on these two aspects of regulatory and health technology assessment. And a very, very high level overview, when there's a new product, a new drug or a new medical device, they need to go to a regulatory agency who will assess that for whether it's an effective product, whether it's efficacious, and whether it's safe. And then in a lot of countries that will then be passed to go through a health technology assessment, where the product will be looked at to decide if it's effective and cost effective compared to what's already in the healthcare system. So these two parts of the system are really important because they need really high quality evidence to make sure that patients are accessing the best treatments, the best devices, the best diagnostics as soon as possible. So that's really what we're focused on. And then just very quickly, a few key facts about the project before I move on to the landscape review. So we're a 5-year project. We started last year, so we've been going just over a year now. We've got a budget of over 42 million, and we're made up of 32 partners. And just to illustrate who they are, you can see there's a really big spread here. It's a public-private partnership, so we are made up of academic, research and public institutions, as well as industrial, small and medium-sized enterprises, and a number of associated and affiliated partners. So we've got a really fantastic mix of people working on the project. So just moving on now into the policy recommendation part that we're focusing on. So just to give you a high level overview, this part of the project has a number of different components. Today we're focusing on this blue component here. So we're really looking at how to make sure that we're developing or looking at recommendations around the acceptability criteria for using real world evidence and data in regulatory and HTA decision making. We do have another section in the green there that we won't be touching on today, but if you're interested, please do contact us and visit our website where we're looking more at policy recommendations around data access and sharing. And what we've been doing within the project, if you just look at the top objective here called identify, that's really where we've started our work. It's looking at where are the policy gaps that we need to be considering when deciding where we need to develop consensus recommendations going forward for policy. So our landscape review that we're talking about today really fits into this identify stage. And in terms of what we have done, we conducted this landscape review specifically to identify what was out there already in terms of policies for real-world data and real-world evidence use in regulatory and HTA decision making. And when I say policies, I'm talking about a fairly broad term. So not just official sort of policies that you might think of as policy, but also like guidance documents, frameworks, and methods guides as well. Our goal through this review was to identify what the priority areas are for us moving forward in the future to develop further policy to support real-world evidence and real-world data in regulatory and HTA decision making. We undertook this piece of work because we knew that since 2017 there's been a really rapid development in the number of these kind of policies being released. The map you can see on the screen here has been taken from the Duke Margolis Institute. They created a dashboard showing the number of different policies that have been released specifically for regulatory purposes. And this just gives you an overview of the different policies from 2023. So you can see there's a lot out there. But what I guess this doesn't show is there's also a real diversity in terms of how, in terms of what policies are available. So some countries haven't developed any policies at all on this, and some have got some really detailed guidance. We also knew that other reviews that have been done on this topic had a more strict focus, so that perhaps they'd only focused on the regulatory side or just the health technology assessment side. Perhaps they just focused on medicines and or medical devices, and they may have been limited to a specific geographic region, whereas we really wanted to look across all of these topics. So we, in the end, ended up analysing 50 documents from 32 organisations. And as I mentioned, the whole point of the review was to look across both regulatory and HTA organisations and both medicines and medical devices. And these documents were authored directly by regulators and HTA agencies, but also through third-party organisations such as international societies. The policies were included ranged from 2017. We felt that anything before this would be outdated, so this was our cutoff, and we wanted to include things as recent as possible, so it ran up to January this year. We do know that even since the publication of our report, there have been updates on real-world evidence guidances from the US FDA and the European Medicines Agencies, as well as some HTA agencies. So it is an area that's evolving rapidly. So even our review hasn't been able to keep pace with the development so far. And as I mentioned, we had a really big team of 17 members from 6 organisations working on this, which I think just highlights the breadth and the depth of the information that we had to go through to pull all this together. So just to give you an idea of the kind of organisations that were included within the review, you can see a list here of some of the ones that were included. So we split this by regulatory and health technology assessment, and then some of the ones that fell into the third party. And as you can see, there is a global focus. So we have international, European and country level organisations included here. And that was really to try and ensure that we could get that kind of really global view of policies. So just moving into the structure of the actual report. And the report is available on the IDERA website. I think one of my colleagues can probably pop the links to the report in the chat. There is an executive summary if you're short on time. There is also the full report if you want to go more into the detail. And as I said, they're both available on our website. But the actual review structure, we divided the analysis into a number of different areas. So starting off, there's just an overview of the documents that we included, so you can find out some more information about those. We then synthesized information on how real-world data and real-world evidence were being defined. We looked at what uses of real-world data and real-world evidence were being described, and we split those into uses of real-world data in research, and then applications of real-world evidence in regulatory activities and HTA processes. And then we summarised what we were seeing across a number of different key areas in the guidance. So we looked at what guidance there was on study design and conduct. We looked at what guidance there was on data collection, curation and characterisation, data quality assessment, ethics, governance, trust and transparency. And then we know this is a really big emerging area. So we did a review of what was included within these documents on the intersection of real world data, real world evidence and AI. And ultimately, we compiled these findings down into 3 areas, and I'm going to talk about each one in detail. So the first area that we looked at was what's the kind of current organisational perspectives on real world evidence and how has this evolved? We've pulled out where we feel there are emerging best practices in terms of using real world evidence and data. And then we've also identified these possible gaps for further exploration. So just starting on the evolving organisational perspective. So probably unsurprisingly, a lot of these documents acknowledge the benefit of real-world evidence. And some of the key areas that they acknowledged that it was useful in was populations that are hard to study, so conditions that are rare or paediatrics. And the other really key benefit that was highlighted was understanding the differences in outcomes from clinical trials compared to outcomes in actual clinical practice. And these are probably things that you've heard a lot before. The other thing that was quite clear, though, that there was, although there was a sort of acknowledgement of the benefits and a want to use it, there was still caution around the role of real-world evidence, especially when compared to using traditional clinical research. We found that there was quite a lot of information regarding how real-world data could be used in research. For example, lots of description around things that could be used to contextualize clinical trials or potentially to provide control arms for a single arm trial. But when it came to actually providing information on the application of real world evidence in that decision-making process for regulatory and HTA agencies, there was less granular description. There was a small number of documents that did include more detailed information and case studies on this, but a lot of the agencies didn't sort of make it clear exactly when it would or wouldn't be accepted. So that's an area that we think could potentially be looked into in further detail in terms of what uses are described in these documents and who is making the statement they'll accept which use when. Unsurprisingly, again, a lot of the perspective was focused on the fact that real-world evidence can be used as a complementary or supplemental source of evidence to traditional clinical trials. And the sort of key area that was coming out that it could be used for is support for identifying and evaluating new safety concerns. There was less interest or less description around using real-world evidence to identify new clinical benefits for indication changes. And we also noted that there are definite differences in terms of perspectives for how real-world evidence could be used between medicines and medical devices. Again, unsurprising because we know these two different categories are treated quite differently and the development of these are quite different. So it's not necessarily surprising, but it is useful to point out. And as I've mentioned, we also noted that there were quite a lot of geographic differences, which potentially could make harmonisation of these kind of policies difficult. So again, something that should be noted and could be taken forward in future policy development work. And ultimately, these concerns reflect the need for us to sort of build policies that build trust and transparency in this kind of evidence. So moving on to the areas that we felt there were emerging best practices. So the first area, we saw that there was a lot of there was a really good section of development on real-world evidence-specific good research practices. So what do you do in terms of making sure that your real-world evidence study is transparent, is done transparently, things like setting protocols. And there was a really good range of policies that kind of included this information, but it's an area we still feel could be championed further and that we could push forward in the future through IDERA. We also found that there was beginning to be a greater alignment on foundational definitions and terms. So, for example, we know most organisations took a very similar definition of the term real-world evidence. We did find some nuances in the use of real-world data. So the types of data sources that were classed under real-world data differed from organisation to organisation, and this could pose a challenge when it comes to harmonisation, or it comes to interpreting these documents if it's not clear which definition should be used. So this could be something that there could be further work on. We also saw, especially in the regulatory documents, a greater movement towards the terms reliability and relevance in terms of data fitness for use. But then we also saw other terms such as data suitability coming out in other documents. So again, just a need to sort of make sure that there's alignment on those terms and what everyone's talking about. We found that there's a whole range of checklists and tools and submission standards that are being promoted, which is fantastic. But it's an area that we feel that potentially IDERA could look at consolidating these tools and promoting across different geographic regions. So this is something that could be an area that we advance further. And finally, we also identified across the different documents that there was a lot of good work going on in terms of pilot programs and implementation programs, where there's a lot of key lessons being learned. And so an area that we could potentially work on here is sort of identifying these, synthesizing these, and ensuring that the key lessons are captured somewhere in a single place. So just moving on to the key policy gaps. So this is obviously sort of where we were focusing in terms of potential policy development. However, as I mentioned, all the areas of emerging best practice could also be something that we work further on. But the key policy gaps that we've pulled out, and I've just outlined 5 different ones here. We felt that there was a gap around aligning the sort of assessment criteria for data fitness for use. So a lot of the policies discussed the need for real-world evidence and real-world data to meet the evidentiary bar for whichever question it was being used to answer. But the actual criteria by which it was to meet that bar wasn't always described in a lot of detail. So there could be a need here to create sort of standardized assessment criteria or look at harmonizing how we're assessing this data fitness for use. So this is a potential policy gap. We also felt that there was a need for greater alignment on analytical approaches. For example, how to address bias and confounding. And so this isn't about sort of saying that there's a particular technique that should be used, but it's about having a consensus on the range of techniques that are applicable, and then potentially more guidance on which technique should be applied in which situation. And in terms of data generalizability and transportability of findings, this is an area that's of a lot of interest, I think, to a lot of people, but in general, we didn't find a huge amount of guidance on these 2 topics and how to actually go about it. I would be remiss to say that since we've published our report, the organisation I work for, NICE, has since published a whole section in their real-world evidence framework on transportability of findings. So it's obviously an area that is moving forward, but at the time it was something that we didn't find a lot of information on. A real gap that we found, I think, was in the use of how real-world evidence is being used to support medical device regulatory activities under the EU medical device regulation, and specifically in relation to in vitro diagnostics. So the guidance around that it's not there. So that's a definite gap in an area that could potentially be something that we look at further. And we also found gaps in terms of other there being guidance on some other of the more kind of innovative and challenging areas, such as digital health technologies and personalised and precision medicines as well. And within that field, there was also a gap. It's hard to call it a gap because it's such an evolving area. It's sort of, I guess it's an area that's everyone's sort of looking at the moment, but artificial intelligence. So where the intersections lie between the use of real world data and evidence and artificial intelligence. And we know this is sort of in a twofold way. How is artificial intelligence being used to help extract and utilize and analyze real world data and evidence, but also how real world evidence can be used to evaluate the use of technologies that include artificial intelligence and software as a medical device. Obviously, our review focused specifically on real world evidence and real world data policies. We didn't look at AI policies, so there's likely to be intersections there, and with the new things like the AI Act coming through, it would be interesting to do a deeper dive in this area to understand what the current guidance is around real world evidence and AI. And the final kind of key policy gap that we identified, that we're just pulling out here, is around the alignment of the guidance and the policies of this type of evidence between regulatory and health technology assessment organisations and evidence standards. So we know that these two organisations, as I laid out earlier, have different remits, so it's not always appropriate for there to be alignment. However, there does seem to be a gap in terms of ensuring that these documents in these agencies are suggesting the same things, are accepting the same evidence standards. And this is something that IDERA going forward could look at if we feel it's a priority. So just moving on now to our public consultation. So we have we've published our report on the IDERA website. And what we're really looking for is to hear from as many different stakeholders as possible about your feelings on the report findings. And ultimately, I guess it's not looking to sort of go through and say what's wrong in the report, or you know, but really from the things we've identified, which are the most kind of the highest priority areas for you as a stakeholder that you'd want us to work on. Obviously, what I've presented today is a huge range of topics, and so we probably can't focus on them all. So we really want to hear from you where you think our focus should be over the next 4 years. So I've just popped the QR code on the screen. You can scan that to go directly to our public consultation page. But what we're asking in the public consultation, as well as general feedback, there's a number of open text boxes, so you can tell us whatever you feel about the findings in the report. But the sort of 3 key questions that we're asking within the consultation are whether the extent to which you feel the report captures the issues that are important to you in relation to real world evidence policies in the regulatory and health technology assessment setting. Whether you think we've missed anything. Is there anything major that you think actually we haven't captured that, and this is something we should really be considering? And then, as I said, we really want to hear from you what should be our priority areas moving forward. So we've got 10 priority areas that we've outlined here, and we're asking people to tell us what their top 3 areas would be. As I said, there's open text box, so if you want to add more, or like I said, add ones that you think we should be looking at that aren't included in this list, please do go ahead and add that. But ultimately, we're looking for you to point us in the direction of where we should be prioritising our future work. And in terms of how the feedback will be used, as I said, we'll be compiling all the feedback from the public consultation. The consultation currently is running till the end of June. So after this, we'll be looking at everything and basically identifying which areas to take forward. And in terms of taking them forward, we're planning on developing a number of multi-stakeholder workshops to convene and discuss these key areas. And ultimately, we'll be developing a series of policy recommendations that we'll be publishing. And the idea will be to publish a set of draft recommendations at the end of 2025. And then just to show you our final timeline, As I mentioned, there's a public consultation currently happening, which we're discussing today. There will be another public consultation on the draft recommendation. So we really want this to be an iterative process where we gather feedback from lots of different people to make sure that the recommendations that we're producing are valid. And then a final set of recommendations will be due in March 2027. So that was everything I wanted to present today. I'll just leave the slide here with all our contact details. So we're on LinkedIn, and there's our website where you can go and find the public consultation. We will be staying around for questions if anyone has any specific questions now. I think we will stop the recording, so we will just be doing that offline. But just to thank everyone for coming today and hearing a little bit more about the work that we've been undertaking over the last year.